All right, here on ET Now, we focus on every aspect of what the COVID-19 is doing, not just to your health, but to your pocket as well. And COVID-19 is coming at a time when inflation is also looming as a concern. We're seeing it on the horizon with rising crude prices. Healthcare costs have gone up. What is that doing to consumer demand? What is it doing to discretionary spends? What is it doing to consumer sentiment? And how is it impacting household incomes? To speak to me on this, I'm joined now by our next panel, Upasna Bhardwaj, Senior Economist at Kotak Mahindra Bank, on the show this evening, Saugata Bhattacharya, Chief Economist at Axis, joining us, and Mayank Shah, Category Head, Parle Products. Welcome to all of you and great to speak with you today. Upasna, let me just start by getting your thoughts. Now, we have still seen about a month and a half of what the second wave is beginning to do. So it's a bit early to get any data to base this on. But is it safe to say that consumer spending is going to be the biggest hit coming out of the second wave?
Yes, I would say that there are two aspects to this. If you were to really compare this to last year, the kind of disruption that we had seen, probably for now, that kind of disruption is not as bad as what we did see earlier. But having said that, I think this time around, the demand side destruction looks to be much more entrenched. And this is something which, again, like you mentioned earlier, it is too early to comment on that. And we will have to wait for more and more data to substantiate that. But for now, we were already sitting on the brink of a reasonably wide, unequal recovery that we were seeing, a K-shaped recovery earlier, with the informal, unorganized segment clearly not yet reviving. Even when we were seeing a reasonable pickup in economic activity, it was more the formal segment which was doing well. And now, to add to that, the second wave is further going to widen this problem. And we will have to wait for data, but situation is not looking that great. And even if you look at the data, whatever is available for the month of April, particularly on the demand side, the unemployment rates are looking significantly bad. The small trader community, the businesses, the salaried, smaller segment, salaried employees and all, we are seeing a reasonable layoffs there. So clearly, things don't look very promising.
Mayank, what can you tell us from what you're seeing on ground? Are you seeing a demand dropping off or staying steady at this time? A big concern we also have to wait and watch is to see how rural India is impacted, because this time round you're seeing reports of COVID-19 in smaller towns, in villages, which are also reeling under higher healthcare expenses.
So I'll break up my answer in two parts. Firstly, I completely agree with what Upasna just stated, that we're seeing a K-shaped recovery where the formal segment of economy, organized players, bigger players are doing reasonably well. It's the unorganized segment, salaried class, which is employed either in SMEs, unorganized segment, which is getting hit the most. In the third and fourth quarter of last financial year, we had seen unorganized segment actually getting back, in terms of revival and all those things. But that has suddenly, taken a U-turn. I mean, in fact, there is a spanner that's there. That recovery has stopped. And in fact, we are seeing a decline that's happening there, as a result of which we are seeing, pull down of the entire thing. That's the first part. The second part, what you were talking about, I see the demand getting, affected in two ways. One, there would be essentials where we don't see really, much of demand getting affected. In fact, the demand is a little higher than the third, fourth quarter for essentials. But if we are talking about discretionary items, non-essentials, like, non-food, beauty products, maybe, tourism and those kind of things, I think that's where the effect is far higher. And they would, probably this particular phase would then probably, push the recovery more than what we would have, expected it to be. So probably we're expecting the other sectors, non-essential, to recover by this year, mid of this year, which I think would be now difficult and probably go in third, fourth quarter of this year.
You know, the question is, Saugata, we saw a V-shaped recovery, pent-up demand galore in pretty much every sector after the first wave. A part of it was also because there was this big national lockdown imposed on everyone. Can we see a repeat of that after we exit the second wave, maybe in another month or so?
Thank you again. One is that in a month or so is very optimistic. The month or so depends on the amount of vaccinations. You're not likely to see a rollout of vaccinations in the next couple of 2 or 3 months at least. Given the fear that we have seen for what the second wave has wrought, I'm very, very uncertain that people will have the confidence to move out. Number two, this is the second year of the lockdown, or the second year of the whatever, loss of incomes, loss of whatever. So the first year round, as you said, pent-up demand, although that was uneven across sectors, pent-up demand, some pent-up demand, people somehow managed to get through with borrowings from friends, relatives, etc. NBFC lending started. This time it's not going to happen. So the second wave is likely to hit demand, especially as we heard discretionary demand, much more than we saw in the last year. Number three, this time round, A-shaped recovery or whatever, the COVID wave has hit middle and upper income families much more than it did the last time round. So we have heard anecdotal evidence. We have got some numbers, very old dated numbers on the medical expenditures, etc. So that's going to eat into discretionary expenditure. We have got some survey numbers from MSMEs, who are some of the biggest consumers in the system as well, not just producing. So now we have seen that MSMEs have spent a significant amount of increased healthcare expenditures, medical expenditures, COVID expenditures, and they are beginning to defer the EMI payments that they owe to banks. So that introduces yet another dimension to the problem that we see. There are multiple more aspects to this, but let me stop.
You know, that's actually a very crucial part. If you're saying this is going to start hitting EMIs, Upasna, I want you to come in on this. Middle and upper income families getting hit more this time round anecdotally. So much higher medical expenses. We had an SBI report. I was speaking to Soumyakanti Ghosh, who was saying that in the last couple of months already, an additional 70,000 crore rupees have been spent in terms of private consumption expenditure on healthcare. So discretionary spends are completely engulfed. Overall, do you think consumer spending will continue to be lackadaisical, especially in items and areas where your upper and middle income families do traditionally spend money?
Yes, absolutely. I think, like the other two panelists have mentioned, see, there are two aspects to this. One is that typically, we have the top 20% of the consumers which contribute the maximum to discretionary spending. So if I was to break that up, of course, the NSSO data is a little backdated, but proportions would have, if at all, changed significantly. On the discretionary spend, the maximum amount is done by the top end consumers. And if this time around, not if, but clearly this time around, we've seen that top end also getting hit reasonably hard. Clearly, we are going to be seeing a prolonged slowdown in consumption, and the revival is also going to be not as smooth as what we saw last time. Last time, we were all surprised with the kind of revival, largely because of the pent-up demand which was there. This time, it's going to be much slower as a revival. Overall, my fear is also that the fear of the third wave, which is already looming, and the fact that vaccination drive is, of course, slow to pick up here. We will be seeing much slower withdrawal of restrictions across various states. That in itself will limit economic activity. So all in all, consumer spending is going to be postponed for sure, reduced and postponed both. And at the same time, it's going to be a much slower revival as against last time when we saw a much faster revival in economic activity.
So, Mayank, give us an idea. How are companies preparing for this? And an overview. I'm not talking specifically about your perspective, because obviously there's staple products which people will continue buying. But overall, any company in this space right now would be worried about how consumer spending is going to pan out.
So, as I shared earlier, as we speak, we are not seeing an issue. But yes, going forward, as my co-panelist shared, that we don't know how the demand would pan out post the second wave until the third wave. And if we are fortunate, and if we don't see the third wave, going forward, once we see the recovery from the pandemic, it's going to be difficult to predict. Honestly, it would not be right on my part to say that this is how. There are two extremes that we are expecting. Either companies would have to really try very, very hard to ensure that, they see or they build demand, they generate demand through various means. Or the other way is, that's the other extreme is that you will see, demand coming in because, and that's something that we saw in, some of the countries like China, where there was revenge buying and stuff like that. If that happens, nothing like that. I mean, that's, one extreme that we are talking about. The other extreme being, effort, being put in by companies to ensure that they are driving the demand and not really expecting consumers to flock back to their brand.
Yeah. Saugata, just your overview on the kind of rural hit we'll get, because we would remember that after the first wave, the resurgence in the demand coming in from the rural economy was really a pillar of support, whether we saw it in tractor sales, in actually all categories. We saw the growth really coming back from there. Considering the incidence of COVID now going beyond the large cities, do you think that that will be one shaky area when it comes round to receding of cases?
It's early days yet. On the rural side. So the two large Met forecasting agencies have forecast a very normal, better than normal monsoon going forward. But I mean, given the number of cases that we are seeing moving down, as you mentioned, in the tier 4, tier 5 towns, in the rural, in the villages, etc., with minimal healthcare, and there is very, very little reporting. There's significant underreporting of the cases. There is almost no healthcare infrastructure in some of the villages and smaller towns. And people are scared now. So that's likely to take off the shine of the impact of the moderate, of the good rains that we are expecting. You already saw that in the first set of numbers, the dealer numbers for tractors, which are already down for the month of April. So that already, and then on top of that, the CMI numbers for rural unemployment are almost 15%. Till April, some of this was masked because this was the harvesting season. The Narega and Manrega, the payouts, the demand for Manrega payments, etc., was more subdued because people were busy in harvesting. But now we are beginning to see the rise in some of the Manrega type payments. And that has very significant implications for the way that the center and the state's fiscs will have to respond to make up for this loss of incomes, activity, etc., in the rural areas.
Yes, absolutely. The big factor we have to keep in mind, of course, is the vaccination program. We're seeing this in the United States, where the vaccination, widespread vaccination of people is leading truly to a sense of euphoria of everything opening up. We have to track clearly and closely how that trajectory pans out. But thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the discussion this evening.